From Microbe TV, this is Beyond the Noise, episode number 72, recorded on June 30th, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today is your host, Dr. Paul Offit.
Hi, Vincent.
Hello, Paul. Welcome back. This is the video version of Paul's column on Substack called Beyond the Noise, cutting to the chase on important health topics. Today we're going to talk about Paul's latest column, The Irony of RFK Jr.'s Conflicts of Interest Gambit. So let's start by having you tell us why RFK Jr. fired all 17 members of the ACIP. You can tell us what that means.
Right. So the ACIP, or Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, is an advisory committee to the CDC that primarily focuses on making recommendations about vaccines for people in this country. That committee is composed of experts in virology, immunology, bacteriology, statistics, epidemiology, and invariably many are clinicians who either have seen vaccine preventable diseases or certainly advise parents and patients about vaccine preventable diseases. That's not the kind of committee that RFK Jr. wants, because they have experts who are going to stick to the scientific data. They're going to make recommendations based on good, reproducible science. That's not him. He believes that vaccines are harming people. He thinks that no vaccine is beneficial. And so he wants the kind of people who agree with him. So he fired them all under the false claim that they had conflicts of interest, which precluded them from being fair, which was completely untrue. Then he proceeded to put initially 8, and it's now 7 people on that committee, many of whom were frankly like-minded to him and have either testified against vaccines in lawsuits on behalf of RFK Jr., have published papers that claimed false vaccine harms, have lobbied states to eliminate school vaccine requirements, are part of an anti-vaccine group like the National Vaccine Information Center. And so this is his crowd. So he can do the kinds of things he wants to do. He can get then bad science through that committee, which will cause them to make decisions that will in no sense benefit and possibly harm the American public.
So let me clarify something. When the ACIP makes a recommendation, is it up to the CDC director to accept it and then give it out to the states, basically?
Yes, it's an advisory group, so they give advice. That advice doesn't necessarily have to be followed by the CDC director. And in fact, there was one time during the COVID pandemic when Rochelle Walensky, who was head of the CDC, didn't follow exactly what the ACIP had advised.
Okay, so if we, and you know, we talked about their decisions last week. If the CDC director doesn't agree with them, they could, in fact, ignore them.
Yes.
Okay, so what? RFK Jr. cited a report supposedly supporting his decision to fire all these people. Did he accurately represent that report?
No, not at all. I mean, the report suggested that there was just rampant conflicts of interest. But when you look more closely at the report, as reported by Jessica Steyer at Unbiased Science, they were trivial things like, punctuation marks in the wrong place, putting something in the wrong box as compared to the other. But what a real conflict of interest is that you have received financial remuneration from a pharmaceutical company, which then causes you to view that product or that company's products favorably. I mean, so for example, when I was on the ACIP between 1998 and 2003, and it's also true today, you have to declare any potential or perceived conflicts of interest. So suppose you are a principal investigator on a grant for a vaccine, or you're on a data safety monitoring board for a vaccine. You can't vote on that vaccine, obviously, nor can you vote on any product that company makes. So that way you have you have perceived conflicts of interest that can in any way influence voting. And that's what this committee currently represents. And there was recently an external advisory group that was looking at this current ACIP and found that there were no conflicts of interest. So he made it up. So when he said that there's all these conflicts of interest, that the committee is ripe with conflicts of interest, he just made it up.
So why is he making it up about these non-existent conflicts of interest?
because he wanted to stock the committee with people who were like-minded to him, who could get through the kind of bad science that he's interested. He wants to scare people about vaccines. I mean, at this last committee hearing, there was a presentation by Lynn Redwood, who was an anti-vaccine activist from 25 years ago when she was head of Safe Minds. Now she's on the Children's Health Defense, which is RFK Jr.'s anti-vaccine committee. So she would never normally have been able to present at that kind of hearing because she was not a subject matter expert. And when she gave a presentation right before a vote, they have something called ETR, which is evidence to recommendation. When you ever give a talk before that, you have to have that talk reviewed by subject matter experts. Hers wasn't, and was just full of misinformation. And then that committee, which was basically an RFK Jr. committee, voted 5-1 in favor. There was one abstention, 5-1 in favor of eliminating thimerosal-containing influenza vaccines, and that was an anti-science vote.
Does RFK Jr. have conflicts of interest?
So, I mean, RFK Jr. has recently made a lot of money suing pharmaceutical companies or referring people to law firms like Wisner Baum, who then sue pharmaceutical companies. And he gets money for every person that he refers. He gets money for any money that's made off of that, about 10% of anything Wisner Baum collects. Of course, he has conflicts of interest. And that's what this is all about. When he testified in front of Elizabeth Warren's hearing, which I guess we'll get to, he refused to say he was going to give up of any of that money, even while he was Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Yeah, I meant we're going to get to that right now, but I meant to say that didn't he promise Senator Cassidy that he would not change the composition of ACIP?
It confirmed he will maintain the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommendations without changes.
Yes, he did. And then he immediately eliminated all 17 members.
So you cannot trust anything that he says, essentially.
Correct.
Okay. So during the confirmation hearings, the Senate confirmation hearings, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who just asked great questions, I'm so impressed with her all the time. She pointed out that he made $2.5 million from Wisner Baum in the past 2 years.
In the past 2 years, you've raked in $2.5 million from a law firm called Wisner Baum.
What's Wisner Baum?
It's just a personal injury lawyer law firm.
So he advises them, right?
Yes.
And she asked him if, as Secretary of HHS, he would forego that income. And what did he say?
No, I'm not going to give up suing pharmaceutical companies. It's too lucrative.
I'm not going to agree to not sue drug companies or anybody.
The thing is, and she points this out, is he can game the system so that products, vaccines look more dangerous than they are because he's in a powerful position as head of HHS, but he refused to give that up.
I would have thought something like that is not acceptable for the head of HHS. Isn't there somewhere written that they can't work with law firms like that?
You would think so. You would think if there's evident conflicts that they wouldn't have been able to do it. But again, that's why you have these confirmation hearings. But, they become so wildly political that, it was, I think the vote was 14-13 in favor of confirming him. And, all those 14 votes were from Republicans.
So then Elizabeth Warren pointed out all the ways that as HHS secretary, he could influence lawsuits. Let's go through some of those, Paul.
So here's what she said. It's like a 4 or 5 minute video. It's really worth seeing because she predicts the future. I only wish she'd predicted sporting events. I mean, she got everything right that she said. She said, quote, "You can publish your anti-vaccine conspiracies, but this time on U.S. government letterhead, something a jury might be impressed with."
You can publish your anti-vaccine conspiracies, but this time on U.S. government letterhead, something a jury might be impressed by.
And that's what he just did. He had a letter which we talked about on a previous podcast that he basically said that the COVID vaccines were dangerous and ineffective in young children or pregnant women. And that's exactly what he did. So she was right about that.
And that's a lie, of course. It's not correct.
Correct.
Okay. He could also remove vaccines from the compensation program, right?
Right. He said that she said you could remove vaccines from special compensation programs, which would allow manufacturers to mass torts.
You could remove vaccines from special compensation programs, which would open up manufacturers to mass torts.
That's the thing that worries all of us the most. If you add to the list of compensable injuries on the vaccine injury compensation program, say you add autism or asthma or eczema to that, you would overwhelm that program. You would eliminate the program. Or you could say, I think these companies should not be, or these particular products should not be covered by the vaccine injury compensation program. Just leave them open to the slings and arrows of civil litigation. And then we're right back to where we were in the early 1980s when there was no vaccine injury compensation program. And we had 18 companies that made vaccines in 1980. But then there was the notion that the wholesale pertussis or whooping cough vaccine could itself cause permanent brain damage that led to a flood of litigation that drove vaccine makers off the market. Mm-hmm. We actually had 8 companies that made pertussis vaccine for this country. But by the time the law firms were done with them, we had one left, and that one said, I'm out. So we were about to lose pertussis vaccines for American children. And so the Reagan administration stepped in. They passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act in 1986, which it became into effect in 1988, and had the vaccine injury compensation program as part of that, which stopped the bleeding. You could still sue pharmaceutical companies. You just had to go through this program first. Mm-hmm. But by the end of the decade, we had 4 pharmaceutical companies that made vaccines. So you basically went from 18 companies to 4 companies that made vaccines, which tells you how fragile that market is.
Here's a good one, Paul. She said you might appoint a vaccine panel that shares your views.
You could appoint people to the CDC vaccine panel who share your anti-vax views and let them do your dirty work.
Which is what he proceeded to do.
This is what we're talking about with the ACIP, right?
Right. So he fires 17 people and replaces them with like-minded people. The one person who was on that committee, Cody Meisner, was with me when I was on and am on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. He's probably the most reasonable person on that committee. So it's not completely a whitewash, but right. But mostly is. I mean, you had 5 people voting in favor of eliminating thimerosal-containing flu vaccines when thimerosal has never been shown to be harmful. It's ironic, by the way, that at the same time, the EPA has stepped back on its regulation of mercury pollution in the environment. So that's the kind of pollution that actually can be harmful. Yeah. So it's ironic.
She also said he could tell the vaccine panel to remove a particular vaccine.
You could tell the CDC vaccine panel to remove a particular vaccine.
Has that happened yet?
Which is just what happened. I mean, the thimerosal-containing flu vaccines, it's probably not going to be a big hit. I think the thimerosal, you don't really remove thimerosal from vaccines. What you do is you just go from multi-dose vials to single-dose vials. But there are advantages to multi-dose vials. I mean, suppose a company wants to mass vaccinate for its employees against the flu vaccine for a particular season. It's much easier to have a multi-dose vial than a single-dose vial.
What's the problem with having no thimerosal in a multi-dose vial?
Well, so the reason thimerosal was first added to vaccines back in the 1930s is when you have a multi-dose vial and the rubber stop, the needle valulates the rubber stopper again and again and again, you can inadvertently introduce bacteria or fungi into that vial so that the person that gets the 8th, 9th, or 10th dose could be inadvertently inoculated with bacteria or fungi. And that's what you saw. Children had cellulitis, which is a skin infection. They had abscesses, collection of pus, or they had bloodstream infection, sepsis, and death. So once thimerosal was added to multi-dose vials, that all went away.
Okay, then he said, after all this questioning, he said to the senator, I have complied with all the ethics rules.
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not.
Is that true? Are there ethics rules, Paul?
I don't know. Seems like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it, when we talk about Congress? But that's what he said. But see, that was a non-answer. She was asking him not to do the things he was doing, and he didn't say he wouldn't do them. He just said he was complying with the ethics rules.
And then he told Senator Warren that he supports the childhood vaccine schedule.
Senator, I support vaccines. I support the childhood schedule.
Seems like another lie, doesn't it?
About as blatant and bold of a lie as you can imagine. I mean, he goes on Lex Friedman's podcast in 2023 and says no vaccine is beneficial. He has said that the COVID vaccine is the most dangerous vaccine ever made. He said that if he could go back in time, he would pay anything not to vaccinate his own child. He says that when he sees a child being held by a parent on a biking path, he goes up to that parent and says, don't vaccinate your child. No, he is about the most virulent anti-vaccine activist out there. So when he says, hey, look, I support vaccines, he is not telling the truth.
And as Caroline Kennedy said, and we'll get to that in a moment, he vaccinated his own kids.
While he at the same time is trying to convince other people not to vaccinate theirs.
I thought the quotes from Caroline Kennedy were very powerful. Can you give us an idea of what she said about him?
Sure. So Caroline Kennedy is John F. Kennedy's daughter. Therefore, that makes her Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s first cousin. So she grew up with him. She knew him. And she felt compelled before this hearing to step up and say something, which is pretty amazing and tells you probably how bad it really was. But what she said that he preys on the desperation of parents of sick children, noting that he had vaccinated his own children while discouraging others from vaccinating theirs. Regarding his lawsuits against the human papillomavirus, or HPV vaccine, Carolyn wrote, quote, he is willing to enrich himself by denying access to a vaccine that can prevent almost all forms of cervical cancer, which has been safely administered to millions of boys and girls. And then the most powerful thing she said is she said, unlike Bobby, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I try not to speak for my father, her father being JFK, but I am certain that he and my Uncle Bobby, meaning RFK Jr.'s father, who gave their lives in public services, and my Uncle Teddy, who devoted his Senate career to improving health, would be disgusted by him. So how can you be more powerful than that? When I watched her say that on television, I was sure he was not going to get confirmed, but I was wrong.
Why couldn't any Republican see through his lies, Paul?
I just think they do see through his lies, but don't care. It's just like you're on my team or you're on the other team, and they're all on this team where you approve anything that Donald Trump puts before you, in this case, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as head of Health and Human Services.
Well, Paul, my feeling is lawmakers are there to help people. And apparently this crop of Republicans are not. They're just there to help themselves.
And to just make sure they get reelected.
So you close by saying now he can make himself and his lawyer friends richer as head of HHS. Would you call that grift?
Yeah, it's the ultimate grift. But that does seem to be the theme here, right? Which is an administration that is a kleptocracy at its heart.
I'll put a link to the column in the show notes, and particularly read Caroline Kennedy's comments. There's a link to hers as well. They're very powerful. That's Beyond the Noise with Dr. Paul Offit. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Vincent.